Here's what a lot of people know about Jon Ims. He wrote Trisha Yearwood's She's in Love with the Boy, which won BMI's Robert Burton Award as the Country Song of the Year in 1992. But as you can imagine, there's a lot more to Jon's success and his story than just one song. Luckily, Tim McLaughlin, who was my guest on episode 2 of this podcast, he was able to connect me with Jon, and we did a Zoom call from his home outside of Nashville. So thanks to Tim, and as usual, thanks to my sponsor, the JPT Foundation, for their ongoing support. Here's episode 21, which is the final episode of season 2, featuring Jon Ims.
Jon Ims, thanks for joining me on the Erie Music History Podcast. I hope things are warming up a little bit in Nashville. Or what do I say? Green
Hills. It's close.
Green Hills. All right. So obviously, Jon, I've done a little bit of research on you, and anybody who knows anything about Erie music history knows your name, knows that after you left Erie, you went on to a successful songwriting career. You wrote, big name songs for big names like Reba McEntire and Trisha Yearwood. Obviously, those are just at the top of the list, but there's plenty of them there. We're going to get to that. But today, I want to test your memory and take you back in time.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to take you back to the to West Mill Creek down there, down by Westlake. Did you grow up in that area?
No, I grew up around Frontier Park, and then we moved to around 7th and Cherry for a while, and then we moved out to Mill Creek out by Westlake Junior High. Was the last stop before the family started going in different directions.
Gotcha. So you then graduate from McDowell in 67, is that right?
Yeah, I graduated from McDowell in 67.
Okay. And, one of the things I like to find out is, when did people start their musical career? When they get into music? I know that it was interesting. I found an article from 1970 that said, Jon Ims is playing at the Erie Summer Festival of the Arts. So you've been out of school, you've been out of McDowell for 3 years, you're in Gannon. And it says that you had been performing professionally for 6 years at that time. So you had been performing even before McDowell, I imagine.
Oh, yeah. I was in my first band. I think I was about 15, something like 15 years old in my first band.
And what was that band?
It was called Little Amber and the Light Runners.
And the Light Runners.
Great name.
Yeah, that is a great name.
And it was guys that I knew from my neighborhood, and a fella named Steve Jarecki, I think, whose family owned Jarecki Jewelers.
Okay,
does that
name
ring a bell? Anyway,
sure.
He had a big rec room in his house, and we started learning songs of the times. Love and Spoonful. I had a little list of things that we did. Yeah, we did songs by the Beau Brummels. Have you ever heard of them?
Yeah.
Laugh, Laugh. Songs by the Byrds and Love and Spoonful, and the Blues Project and Butterfield Blues Band. We were into kind of the alternative music of the time. And so when we're 15 years old, we were trying to learn the chords, trying to learn how to sing and all that. But it was, we were in a rec room when I was about 15 years old.
And you're playing guitar?
No, I hadn't played guitar. I think I had got my first guitar, and I was learning chords when I was about 15. My mother bought me a gut string guitar, a little Giannini from Markham's Music. Mm-hmm. And I went home and I got a couple songbooks, and I got the Mel Bay songbook with all the pictures of the hand on the chords. And I started learning how to play the guitar, but I was a little bit behind everybody else. There was other guitar players. So I was a singer.
You were a singer. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I figured. And did you guys ever play out?
We played one gig, I remember, played with the Montels, which was a bunch. They were a good band in Erie at that time, and we played one of these WJET sock hops or whatever you call it. With Randy Michaels was the DJ for WJET, and he was the MC. And we played, and the Montels played in I don't know where it was, but it was a thrill to be on a stage and have lights and to hear our music. And I can't even remember if we stunk or not, but I do remember that we had the gig.
But you kind of caught the bug at that point, I imagine.
Yeah, you hear your voice coming over the echo in a gymnasium, and you hear the band playing, and it maybe sounds better than you really are.
Sure.
So yeah, I got into it, and I fell in love with the music.
And so what happens then? You obviously are working on your Mel Bay chords and learning guitar. Then this takes you into McDowell? Do you form other bands, or?
Well, I'm playing I'm actually on the basketball team at McDowell. And incidentally, they're inducting us into the McDowell Hall of Fame or something this summer. So I might be up in here. But yeah, I've got a couple notes here of different things that I was doing back then. Is it okay to have a little bit of a cheat sheet? Let me get to this. The first thing I remember, Mike Redcliffe.
You know what?
Mike Redcliffe.
I have his name written here as someone that I should interview because I know that he
played. Oh, Mike, you got to interview Mike. Mike Redcliffe at the time when I was going to McDowell was the best singer in Erie that I had ever heard.
That's what I've heard.
He was in a band called the Calientes.
Right.
And the Calientes used to play. I remember the first time I saw them was in somebody's basement at a party. And they were in the corner, and the lead guitar and the vocal were coming out of the same Fender Twin, and I think the bass player might have had a separate amp, but it was that kind of thing where, they're playing in a basement. And right. Mike sang some songs and blew me away. I was so impressed with them, and I became friends with the band. And at some point, I had followed the band around, and I knew their repertoire. And Mike, for some reason, wasn't able to do some gigs. And so Tom Miller, who was a guitar player in the Calientes, called me up and asked me if I would sit in with the band at a gig, and did I know all their songs? And I said, well, I know most of them, but, give me a list and I'll learn them. Right. So I started becoming a sub-singer, I guess you would say, for the Calientes whenever Mike wasn't available to sing with the band. And that was my first experience of being, let's say, playing in a gymnasium or a fire hall or whatever that was filled with people. And because the Calientes were very popular. So there was a lot of pressure. Pardon me?
Were they a little older than you, or?
No, I think we were about the same age.
Okay.
They were just really good. And so there I was singing in front of a band that was really great, in front of a lot of people on different weekends. Mm-hmm. And so I had to kind of up my game there. But that was a wonderful experience for me. And then while I was singing with the Calientes, there was a kid from Franklin that came up and saw our band play somewhere. And he was the bass player for a band called the Rebels out of Franklin. And he asked me what my situation was, and he knew of the Calientes and knew that Mike was the regular singer. So he said, if you ever want to join a band, we're looking for a singer. So I went down to Franklin and joined the Rebels and commuted. Man, that was a long commute back then.
It was,
and started playing with the Rebels on weekends. And that's the first time I ever saw. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, was that the same type of music?
Well, we were doing stuff like I Can See for Miles by The Who, and Sean Bonneville and the Music Machine, a couple songs by them. And it was pretty hard rock. We had a strobe light, I mean, it was fun.
Yeah.
And that was the first time I ever saw the band called the Ravens. Have you ever heard of them, with the Popotnik brothers?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And I think we did a Battle of the Bands or something with them in Oil, Franklin or whatever. And I got to see another band that was really good play. And so I was in the Rebels for a while. And then, still sitting in with the Calientes every once in a while. And then Skip Neubauer, who was in the Arkay IV,
Sure.
Skip.
I'm about to interview him, hopefully.
Yeah. Well, I think he saw me, if I remember correctly. He saw me singing with the Calientes and did the same thing that the guy from the Rebels did. He came up and said, if you're ever looking for a band, we're looking for a singer. And so I started singing with the Arkay IV.
Wow.
And which was, a really well-known Erie band. So we started playing all the gigs around Erie, and I was playing with the Arkay IV for a long period of time, until one night we were playing at a club. Where the 3D.
Oh yeah, the 3D. Yeah, right.
Well, there was some club that was owned by, I think, Cy Ciotti, who owned the
the Village.
The Village, that's what it was. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, the Arkay IV was doing a gig at the Village, and I was in the middle of singing California Dreamin'. I still remember it. And right in the middle of the song, I looked over, and sitting by the wall was John Novello. And he was watching our set. And when we finished the set, he came up and introduced himself and did the same thing. He said, "We've got a singer, Mike Newber, and Mike is about to get drafted or something." There was some situation with the Army, and he was looking, Simon Grace, and he was looking for a lead singer. And would I be interested? And at that time, believe it or not, I think Mike Redcliffe was also off and on with the Arkay IV.
So you just kept switching.
It was the oddest thing.
Yeah.
But anyway, at some point I left the Arkay IV and joined Simon Grace and Tuesday Blues. And we started playing around town. And then Mike Newber, I don't know where he went. Maybe he did go into the Army. I don't know.
I think he did.
Yeah, and then we started forming CJ Bri and adding the lineup that became CJ Bri, Durf McKeaton and Jack Coleman and Army Grassi and
Jay Lewis.
Right. And that band was the biggest band I was ever in Erie. I mean, we just hit the roof.
How old were you at this time? Like when you're switching in and out of these bands? Are you in Gannon yet, or?
Yeah, I'm in Gannon, and I'm, I don't know, 19, 20 years old or something like that.
And you're studying at Gannon what? Theater, music?
I'm an English major, and I'm in the theater, and I've done a number of plays. And the director at the time, Joe Appolito, asked me to write some songs for a play that he was doing called Summer Tree at the Gannon Theater. And so I wrote all the songs that he needed to be written. And the play was one of those kinds of plays where they froze the action at certain points and then put a spotlight over to the right on the proscenium, where I sat on a stool and played a song. The play went back and forth like that. Well, then the Erie Times did an article on me and said, songwriter Jon Ims, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And all of a sudden I was a songwriter, and I began playing across the street at the Gannon College Coffee House. And started to meet all the acoustic guitar players in town and the people that were listening to blues and jazz and alternative things. And I became part of that scene at the same time I was in CJ Bri.
Were you writing music at the time?
Yeah, I started to write songs when I think I was about 16.
Oh, okay.
I
All
was
right.
when I learned the guitar, I wanted to learn songs at the same time. And so I started to write my own songs. And
Mhm.
by the time I wrote songs for Summer Tree, I knew how to write a song.
Hmm.
And the play went over very well. And so I started becoming known as a songwriter in town, separate from CJ Bri.
Yeah, I saw a lot of ads and mentions, like you said, in the newspaper, and they would list you as that. The one thing I noticed, you were on a committee back at Gannon when they brought Sly and the Family Stone to concert into Gannon.
Well, I was the vice president of student government at Gannon in the early 70s, or I think it was early 70s, when we brought Sly and Steppenwolf and Yes and Hot
Yeah,
Tuna.
right,
And I mean, we tried to bring the best music we could, especially the music that we personally liked.
right,
We liked,
right.
we imagine Yes playing at the Gannon
I,
College.
I've heard
Well,
about it. Yeah, I
oh,
mean that's
it was,
crazy.
it was
And I know John
fantastic.
DeMello, when I talked to him, he talked about when Sly was on stage and he just had a whole bunch of Leslies in the back.
Yeah.
And John said, I want that many Leslies for my
Well,
own
they
band.
had a wall of Leslie's and a wall of custom amps. That was the
Right,
name of the amps,
with the K.
and
Yeah.
lined all the way across the stage. And we saw their setup, and we thought, "Oh, we got to do that." And it was great. They had Three Dog. We had Three Dog Night, and opening for Three Dog Night was Tony Joe White. And I think Hoyt Axton also did a set there. So I saw these, acoustic guys playing as well.
And you got
And
to meet them.
I got to meet him and hang out backstage. We
That's
got to
cool.
hang out with Sly, and it was fantastic. But it was
Yeah.
also, you got a taste of what it was like to be in the music business.
Sure. Right.
So all of that kind of rubbed off on me, and I thought, this is where I'm going.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned Yes, because I was reading an article that talked about CJ Bri and it described them as a prog rock band.
Yeah.
And is that accurate?
Well, yeah. I mean, Jack Coleman, when we got Jack in the band, Jack was a performance major, I think, at Edinburgh in the music department. And he was working up Franz Liszt's B minor piano concerto for his senior recital. So he was that good on the keyboard. And Novello was just as good, if not better, on the keyboard and the organ. And so we had access to be able to play all these very sophisticated songs because all these guys were music majors. Durf
Gotcha.
McKeaton was studying pieces by Bach, in his spare time. And so there wasn't anything that we couldn't learn. And Johnny, of course, was the leader. And we would just pick all this sophisticated material. And even in the songs that were very popular at the time, we would jam on them in the interior and sometimes, go off in these amazing tangents that we had worked out up at the shack where we were rehearsing every day.
Where was that at?
It was behind Durf McKeaton's house. We called it the shack. And we that spray foam insulation?
Yeah.
We spray foamed the entire interior with about 5 inches thick of yellow spray foam insulation. It was like our little cave. And we would go in there, every day of the week for a long time and rehearse and work up our shows and work up all these really highly sophisticated musical pieces.
Was this behind his parents' house or something? The shack?
Yeah. And they were getting complaints from the neighbors. So we
I
had
wondered.
to spray foam insulated.
Yeah.
Because we had, we were playing balls to the wall.
Right.
But, we were totally, there was no plan B at that point. I know I can say that for Novello and myself, that there wasn't any plan B. We were all in on, making it in some way.
And how about, so you're in college now and you're John comes to you at the Village, says, "Hey, let's form this band." And so you're at the genesis of that band, and you guys start up. How long does it take to start playing out?
Oh boy, I can't even remember. All I know was you've talked to John, so you know how disciplined he is.
Yes.
And the rest of the band was, very disciplined as well. And so we took songs that Simon Grace and Tuesday Blues had already worked up, and then we began to work up a whole group of songs by bands like, let me think of this. Traffic, Blue Cheer, Dave Mason, Spirit, The Doors, a band called Rhinoceros that was fantastic. I think we did some Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Hendrix, Cream, Iron Butterfly, Lee Michaels. We did some Blood, Sweat and Tears. So, and all of those, the songs vary in sophistication, but we worked up all those songs that we loved. And then we started going out and doing gigs in places where you could play, hard rock at a loud volume.
Like Eagle Ridge?
Eagle Ridge, the White Elephant, I think, and, places where a lot of people could show up and party and loved loud music. It was a scene, boy.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you is, there was a scene at that time, just like there always is. What do you remember of the scene back then? Because we're talking about what, 71, 2?
Well, we're talking about, say, 70, 71, 72, maybe even into 73 before we split up on our separate ways. But it was a big scene there for a bunch of years, and Eagle Ridge was one of the main places we played. A little bit out of town, and we had a following that just followed us around, and then they would tell their friends, and before long there were just hundreds and hundreds of people that were coming to our gigs, and it was a real kind of it was a trippy crowd, let's put it that way. There was drugs and people were stoned, and half the people were dancing, but half of them were just, sitting on the floor, getting into the band, listening to the band and stuff like that. So it was that kind of a scene.
What were some of the most memorable gigs that you had back then? Eagle Ridge gigs, or a lot of people mentioned
Eagle Ridge might have been the top, and a lot of bands that played there would probably tell you the same thing. Because of the stage setup and the amount of people that would pack into that place. It was just to the gills with people. Yeah. And also we did these, what we called beer blasts, where we had our own, rent our own hall, pay for their beer ourselves, and have our friends work the bar while we played, and we charge admission at the door. And that way we could get more people in. Sure. And when we got really big, we had a number of those going on, and those were huge gigs. So they were a lot of fun.
I think I remember hearing about maybe one at Paderewski Park or something like that you guys rented out the whole park and just basically did exactly what you said. So a lot of people.
There was also one at St. Nick's Grove, I think is the name of the place.
That's right.
And the God's Children motorcycle gang showed up from Cleveland, and some rival gang showed up, and they dosed a lot of what people were drinking with psychedelics. And I remember at the end of the night, those guys, those bikers even had, they had Rottweiler dogs that were barking, and they were doing wheelies on their bikes. And we all ended up in the big U-Haul truck with the door closed in the back, just sitting in the truck waiting for the bikers to leave, because they were all, flipping out, and we didn't know what was going to happen. But that, interesting things like that would happen.
Did you guys have a road crew at the time? Did you have a PA?
Oh, yeah, I had to buy the PA. And and we had guys, Joe Scatella, I remember, was one of the guys who worked with us a lot. And he had a crew of 2 or 3 other guys. So we normally had about 4 guys hauling Novello's organ around and his Leslie's and all that, and helping with the PA system. There was a lot of gear, but those guys were just wonderful guys. And, you know, they still are. I think Joe Scatella lives here in Nashville.
Yeah,
he's a songwriter in Nashville.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, talented guys, but they were there when we needed them.
Yeah, I've heard about that. Yeah, and it's interesting to me that you got this start in these rock and then prog rock bands, and this is complicated stuff. Yet you then go on to be known as a folkie, you know, almost like, you know, the solo folk artist. I saw that a lot in the ads and things that I saw. How does that evolve? So eventually, CJ Bri, what happens? You split up and they become a trio?
They became a trio, and they went to Boston, I think, to go to Berkeley. And I had been writing songs to that point and had a name for myself in Erie. And Mercyhurst College had this, was on what was called the National Coffee House Circuit. And so every weekend up at the rec department up there in Mercyhurst College, an act from New York or somewhere would come in and play, you know, professional acoustic folk singers. One of them was Robin and Linda Williams, who ended up being on Garrison Keillor's Prairie Home Companion for years.
Yes.
And Jerry Jeff Walker was another one that was on for a while. Josh White Jr. And I would see these really good, you know, national folk singers coming into our venue up there at Mercyhurst, and I would befriend them. You know, I'd go out and hang out with them. I'd watch them every night. And there was one guy that came through, his name was Barry Drake. And Barry was from New York, and he knew the people that ran the coffee house circuit. And he set me up with an audition in New York City at the Bitter End Club, which was the famous folk club at the time.
Yeah.
And I drove over to New York City, and I auditioned for the National Coffee House Circuit. And there was, like, you know, one of these cattle calls where there's 30 acts and everybody gets 2 songs.
Sure.
Well, I passed the audition. So they gave me my first tour, and it started at St. Bonaventure, which was my grandfather's alma mater. And I played St. Bonaventure in a number of schools in Pennsylvania, and all of the schools would rate you. And so I got 5-star ratings. And before long, I was touring all over the country as a separate solo act.
So when you would go to those, that's what I was going to say. Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say, when you go to those schools, are you the main act, or are you still playing with a bunch of other ones?
No, I'm the main act. And,
okay.
For either one night or in states like Minnesota and Wisconsin, you would play every branch of the University of Wisconsin for 3 days apiece, and then you'd go to the next one. And so you could have an entire tour in the state of Wisconsin. And I would carry my PA system. I had a van and a PA and my guitars, and I would travel from town to town, set up in the coffee house, do a sound check, and hang out with the coffee house people and do the gig. And always invariably after the gig, you'd go to some bar and hang out with all the students. Yeah. And after 3 nights, you're friends with everybody, and you're sleeping on somebody's couch and playing guitars with everybody there. And then you move on to the next school. And I did that for over 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I was on the road all over America by myself as a solo act for 10 years, playing colleges and opening shows for all kinds of, well-known acts at the time. Just a list as long as your arm of people.
So that is, when you and I briefly spoke before, you talked about when you left Erie in like 78, you went to Colorado, but that's not what we're talking about here.
No,
Right.
I was on the road, I think in 73 or 74 was my first coffee house gig.
Okay.
And I was on the road continually, and I had a home base in Erie until I moved out to Denver in, I think, 77 or 78. I'm not sure of the year, but then that was my home base, and they still booked me out of there.
Oh,
But
okay.
I started playing all over Texas and New Mexico, and I started meeting the whole scene that was happening in Austin at the time, which
right.
that was Willis Allen Ramsey and Guy Clark, Towns Van Zandt, Nancy Griffith, Lyle Lovett.
Wow.
All of them were playing in that scene, and I became a part of that scene from Denver, because I had played a lot of the clubs down there, and I met all those people. So over the years, established myself in Austin, and also the Kerrville Folk Festival, which is the songwriter festival of Texas. If you're anybody, you play there.
The Kerrville.
And in Kerrville, yeah. And that's where I met everybody. And that's a whole other world.
What led you to go to Colorado? I was just curious about that.
A woman.
I should have known.
A beautiful woman. And she said she wanted to, get out of town and wanted to move to Colorado. And was I coming or not? It was that kind of, and I look back on that, and I was really appreciative. I really did need somebody to kick my butt out of Erie and get me to somewhere that maybe had a larger market and larger exposure.
Sure.
So I moved out to Denver, and while I was still touring, I was also, I hooked up with Phaline Productions, who they run all the Red Rocks concerts and all of that. Oh. And I started being able to open shows for people like Randy Newman and Greg Allman and Jerry Jeff Walker and Buddy Guy, and just on and on and on, Dr. John. And I got
Red Rocks
I played Red Rocks with the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. Jeez. And Hank Williams Jr. and Emmylou Harris.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it was something. I had become pretty big in Denver. I had won a bunch of the Best of Denver awards, and I had won some songwriting competitions. So I suddenly had a name in a much bigger market.
Gotcha.
And I met all of these people who were in the business, and Phaline booked everybody. I mean, from Springsteen to the Talking Heads. I mean, everybody came through town, and I got to meet everybody. I hang out with ZZ Top, and all the it was really cool. Yeah. But they introduced me. I got to meet the booking agents and the managers and the lawyers of these people, and that was where I got the connections to start sending my tapes around, and people started doing my songs.
Oh, okay. So who? First of all, the girl from Denver, is that the one that She's in Love with the Boy is written about?
No, that's Falling Out of Love is written about her.
That's the other one. Okay, gotcha.
All right. Reba had
Reba's song.
With that.
Yeah. All right.
And
She's
then in Love with the Boy is a girl from Erie who I will not mention. Yeah. And it's a very convoluted story about how that song came about, but it's essentially absolutely true, as is Falling Out of Love. I mean, I was just writing my life at that point.
Sure. Does the girl in Erie know who she is, that it was written about her?
No.
Okay, good.
And I really don't know whatever became of her.
Yeah.
But she bought me a house.
Okay. That's the way to look at it.
Absolutely.
So when you're with Phaline and you're opening for these big acts, are you doing all of your own original?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. And you get 20, 25 minutes, and you go up in front of whoever the act is, and you do your 25 minutes, and then you go back in the green room and hang out and meet the artist. And there was one night I opened for Randy Newman in front of about 3,000 or 4,000 people. And I got this really loud ovation when I finished. And I remember having to pack up my gear really quickly and drive over to the Holiday Inn airport in Denver, because I had a lounge gig or something.
Mhm.
And I walked into the lounge and there were two people sitting there at the bar with their backs to me. And I got up and played a 4-hour set at the Holiday Inn after I played in front of 3,000 people in front of Randy Newman. Talk
Right.
about a humbling experience.
I bet.
But it's like that, you know, when I didn't have any gigs on the road, and I would take whatever I could get around the Denver area. And sometimes it was a gig where, you know, you just took it because the manager of the place liked you. And so
Sure.
you did the gig. I was saying yes to everything at that time.
Yeah, you had to. Yeah, I
Yeah.
imagine that was your job.
That was my job.
Right. All those, I'm sure everybody's asked you these things over the years, you know, as you opened for all those big acts. I mean, any memorable hangouts behind, you know, afterwards with them, or anybody that made, you know, that were really nice?
Well, Richie Havens,
Oh,
the great guitar player, played
Yeah.
Woodstock, and he was phenomenal. And I did a show with him up in Fort Collins at Colorado State, someplace in Colorado State. And before the gig, went up, you know, did my sound check and went up to the green room. And Richie was sitting there with his guitar player friend. And we were talking, and he was the nicest person. He was just a wonderful human being. And at one point, his guitar player reached into his case and pulled out the largest joint I'd ever seen in my life. And we proceeded to smoke the whole thing. And this was before the gig started. And I had no idea how strong this pot was, but I want to tell you, Richie Havens, when he played, he was stoned. And I went up in front of this huge crowd, and I looked at my guitar, and it looked like an alien being. I thought, what is this? It's a guitar. Okay, how do you play it? Where do you put your fingers? What is this? Where's the set list? I don't know how I got through that gig, but I looked over about halfway through it, and Richie was standing off stage with this huge grin on his face. Like, you know, I told you so. And then he went on, you know, just as stoned as I was, he went on and destroyed the place. He was so good. But that was one, I'll never forget that night.
That's great.
And then there was a night that I opened for Asleep at the Wheel up in Evergreen, Colorado. And Willie Nelson showed up because he lived up there. And he was friends with Ray and everybody in the band. And so I did the set, and right in the middle of my set, I looked over at the bar, and Willie Nelson was standing there watching me. And I finished a song, and he gave me this kind of nod, and, you know, the "You're okay, kid" nod.
Yeah.
And that just was it for me. And then he got up and sang with Asleep at the Wheel, and he was fantastic. And that was another great memory of, you know, just kind of being acknowledged and accepted by people that you know, idolized.
Sure.
And I had a lot of affirmation from a lot of the people I opened shows for, and a lot of gratitude because they pointed me in the right direction, or just told me they really thought I was, you know, I was good and I was on my way somewhere. And hearing it from those kinds of guys was really inspirational for me.
I thought for sure you were going to say that then Willie offered you a joint, because you always hear about you don't want to smoke with Willie.
Well, you don't. I was stoned with Willie, and the band stood outside the club, you know, and Willie knew everybody. Yeah. And we all stood out there and got stoned, and Willie was, I think he got up and sang Whiskey River, and he had to lean on the piano in order to stand erect.
Yeah.
But, you know, there's times, I mean, there's lots of that.
Sure. Yeah.
So but that was just the way it was.
And so eventually now, you're playing on your own. And like you said, now you're kind of getting into the songwriting mode, right?
Yeah.
So do people start shopping your stuff around? How do you end up in Nashville?
Well, I won some big awards. I won the American Song Festival, which was kind of like the what are the shows that are on television today, The
Okay.
Voice and Want to Be a Star and all that kind of stuff, except you didn't have television exposure. But the American Song Festival was the biggest song contest in America. They had about 30,000 entries. And I ended up winning the grand prize at the American Song Festival in, I think, around 1982.
Okay.
And they took me to LA, and I met a lot of producers and music industry people there who were on the judging panel. So that gave me some ins in Los Angeles. And then, like I say, I won a number of awards in Denver. And that brought me to the attention of a lawyer who worked for Warner Brothers. And he was, there was an act called Jill Sobule. And she did an album, I think, with Todd Rundgren produced her.
Okay.
And I met her lawyer, who was very kind to me and very nice, and saw me play a couple shows. And he knew people at Warner Brothers. And so I gave him a tape of songs, and he sent it on out to Warner Brothers in Nashville. And I kept calling him saying, have they listened to it? Have they listened to it? And one time I called and he said, Jon, they are aware of you. And that was the way he said it. And I thought, okay, what does that mean? But it meant that they knew who I was, and they were aware of the buzz going on in Denver about me. And that's currency in Nashville. If somebody's even heard your name, it gets you in a door.
Right.
And so then around the same time, the Dixie Chicks cut some of my songs, and they were trying to get a record deal in Nashville. And a gal named Christine Albert was also, who was also part of that Austin scene, cut a song of mine. She's in Love with the Boy. And the Dixie Chicks were doing some songs. And all of a sudden, there was this little buzz going on in Nashville about, oh, there's this guy out in Colorado that writes all these songs.
Were the Dixie Chicks the first band that, recorded one of your songs?
No, there was a band called Hickory Wind who I met at Kerrville. They were kind of a bluegrass band from East Tennessee, and they had connections in Nashville. They were playing at the Station Inn in Nashville, and I had pitched them a whole tape of my songs maybe a year before, and in walks this guy named Paul Kraft, who was a publisher, who wrote Keep Me From Blowing Away for Linda Ronstadt. And he, not only that, but he also owned the publishing for The Gambler. Okay. And so he was a big publisher in Nashville. And he heard this band at the Station Inn, and he heard these 3 songs that he really liked. So he went backstage after the show, and it turned out that the 3 songs he liked were all written by me. Okay. So he got the phone number, because I had always put phone numbers on my cassettes that I pitched. He got my phone number, and he called me in Denver. And he said, Jon Ims, this is Paul Kraft from Nashville. And that was the beginning of me sending him, he said, send me everything you have. So I sent him a 24-song, 90-minute cassette of my best songs. And the song Falling Out of Love was on there, and also one called West Texas Wind. And he got West Texas Wind cut by a bluegrass band called the Seldom Scene, who were very big in the Washington, D.C. area, the whole bluegrass East Coast scene. And they started playing West Texas Wind. And then he started pitching Falling Out of Love around town, and he demoed it with a male artist. And they pitched it to Kenny Rogers, and he put it on hold. But he, and when they put it on hold, sometimes it's forever. Sure. So he had this idea. He said, why don't you write a female version? So I wrote a female version, and there was this great singer in town, Linda Davis, who sang the demo, and they pitched it to Reba. And Reba not only loved the song, but she loved the singer. So Linda Davis ended up being in Reba's band. And Linda Davis is the mother of the lead singer of Lady Antebellum, or Lady A now. The Grammy-winning, that's her mom.
How about
and
that?
So, it's a small town.
Yeah.
So Reba cut Falling Out of Love. And I told Paul that I would give him half the publishing if he got it recorded by a major artist. So one day in the mail comes this LP of Reba McEntire's Rumor Has It album. And with this little note that said, "Is this big enough for you, John?" Is Reba big enough for you? And so all of a sudden, Falling Out of Love was, out.
So that was like your first big hit.
That was my first big cut.
Yeah.
And they released it as a single after the tragedy of her band, some of her band being killed, flying out of San Diego in a Learjet. They hit a mountaintop. And a couple of the band members were killed. Yeah, it was a tragedy. And so they released Falling Out of Love because it was a ballad. And it fit the appropriate time. And at the same time that, this is her pictures on People magazine, and this thing is getting, all kinds of publicity because of the tragedy.
Right.
The song is released, and suddenly the song's going up the charts. And all of the people in Nashville are going, who's Jon Ims? Who wrote this one? And
you're still in Denver.
Pardon me?
You're still in Denver?
I'm still in Denver.
Yeah.
And Falling Out of Love is starting to move on the charts, and I'm getting phone calls. And Paul is saying, why don't you come in here, stay with me, and I'll introduce you around town. So I stayed with him, and I met Chet Atkins and Little Jimmy Dickens and Tony Brown, who was the producer of Reba's Falling Out of Love. At these parties, Paul would have these parties at his house, and all these people would come over, and he would introduce me as, kind of the next big thing, because Paul was promoting his songwriter.
Sure.
And so all of a sudden, everybody in Nashville is starting to wonder who I am. And I'm living in Denver, and the song's going up the charts, and they're starting to say, well, when are you going to move here?
And have you even met Reba at this point?
No, but I ended up playing the Paramount Theater in Denver, opening for Reba, like a year later.
Okay.
And all my friends in Denver coming out and seeing me play in this theater opening for Reba McEntire. So we met and became, she's just she's funny, she's authentic, and she's lovely. And I'm so appreciative of her. So anyway, that was, but I was still making all kinds of, I had great gigs in Denver, and I was making a great living, and I didn't know if I should move to Nashville or not, where I really didn't know anybody, and there weren't any gigs to speak of, and I'm a gig guy,
right?
I'm used to playing live, and so I didn't know what to do, and then I wrote "She's in Love with the Boy" in Denver, and sent it over to Paul. And I'll never forget, he said, "What am I supposed to do with this?" and think of it, back then, there was nobody that was singing kind of rock country before.
What year are we talking?
This is about 1989, 1990.
Gotcha. Okay.
I wrote it in 88. Maybe I sent it to Paul in the fall of 88 or something.
Okay.
But no, there wasn't anybody doing that kind of thing. And this was before Highway 101 hit and before the Judds hit.
Okay.
And it was just before that big thing was happening. And the class of 90 and 91, they call it, was coming in with Clint Black and Alan Jackson and Garth Brooks. It was a whole youth movement that happened. Well, I was at the right place at the right time with the right song. But Paul's connections, he didn't know what to do with it. And so that's when I got kind of frustrated with that. And I ended up going down to South by Southwest in Austin, the big festival down there. And I did a showcase with my friend Hal Ketchum, who was had a lot of hit records in Nashville after that. And we did a showcase at a club, and the Warner Brothers people who knew of me, remember, well, they showed up. And I ended up, one of the Warner Brothers guys was available in an afternoon. And I went over to a friend of mine's house in Austin and sat this guy from Warner Brothers down at the kitchen table and played about an hour's worth of my songs, sitting right in front of him playing my guitar.
Wow.
And when I was finished, he gave me his card and he said, when are you coming? And I said, when do you want me to come? He said, as soon as you can. And so Warner Brothers flew me into Nashville about, I don't know, maybe a month later, when I could get a break in my gigs. And they took me around Warner Brothers, and suddenly I'm meeting Jim Norman, the president of Warner Brothers, and I'm hanging out with the songwriters there and meeting some of the acts. And I went into Jim Ed Norman's office, and they introduced me, and he goes, "Oh, I know who you are." And he held up my cassette of She's in Love with the Boy. And he said, "This is going to be a hit." And here's the president of Warner Brothers telling me this song's going to be a hit. I'm like pinching myself. And, at the same time, Hal Ketchum calls me up, and he's part of the Garth Brooks, Trisha Yearwood world over at Alan Reynolds' studio. And he calls me and he says, there's this girl, Trisha Yearwood, she's fantastic. And she's doing your song in all of her sets, showcasing for record companies. And you got to hear her. And so, he put the bug in my ear about her. And then Garth Fundus called, who's a great record producer, who I had befriended because I had pitched songs to him before. And he called and said, I want to cut She's in Love with the Boy with Trisha Yearwood. And I said, I don't know. Because I wanted Highway 101 to do it, or the Judds, or somebody that was already had a name.
Yeah.
Because I really wanted to go as far as I could. But he said, I'll never forget. He said, John, this is Garth talking. Trust me on this. This is going to happen. And I remember that. And I said, okay, go ahead.
And you didn't know who Trisha really was at that point.
No, we'd never met anything.
Yeah.
Trisha was known as the best demo singer in town.
Oh, okay.
All the producers knew her because she sang all the great demos. And she was a secretary along with Faith Hill. They were secretaries at Tommy West Productions or something.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's interconnected in Nashville.
Sure, right.
The story could get really long. But anyway, Trisha cut it. And at the same time, Falling Out of Love is going up the charts. Trisha releases MCA Records, and Tony Brown released She's in Love with the Boy. And that started inching up the charts. And suddenly I've got two songs that are kind of moving. And Hal Ketchum has a Small Town Saturday Night, and he's going up the charts. And we all know each other. And it's all of a sudden things are getting really intense. And it looks like I'm going to leave my old life behind. And something really, and something really big is going to happen. And I didn't know what it was, but I could feel it.
How does that work as far as you being the songwriter? Are you getting payments already on that, or how does that work? As far as
it's interesting about the money usually shows up about a year later.
Okay.
The money starts showing up. It takes that long to happen. So, you know, I'm owning most of the publishing, by the way, on these songs.
Okay.
And I'm owning all of the writer. So I'm in, you know, I'm ready to cash in if these
You're in a good
songs
spot.
become hits.
Right.
And at the same time, I've got all these gigs in Denver that I could have, a life that I could have, and I'm caught between leaving everything I've built and moving to Nashville or not.
Yeah.
And it was it was a moot point because around August of 91, both of these songs are in the top 5.
Oh, geez.
And Hal is also in the top 5. So, and they're staying there for weeks at a time. And the money is the same, whether you have a #1 hit or anything in the top 5 is the same amount of money, if you think about it, because it's being played in the same rotation.
Right, right.
So it's in this rotation for weeks and weeks and weeks. And then Falling Out of Love goes to #2. She's in Love the Boy goes to #1. And Falling Out of Love doesn't go to #1 because She's in Love with the Boy's #1.
Right.
You know, and all of a sudden, you know, it's Get Me Jon Ims. You know, it's who's Jon Ims? Get me Jon Ims. And that experience is amazing. And it's a huge leap. It's and it can work in very positive ways, but it can also freak you out in a lot of ways. You know, suddenly everybody wants to interview you, everybody wants to talk to you, and all the publishers want to give you money to sign up with their publishing companies, and they're all coming at you at the same time. And
that can freak you out, I imagine.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and all of a sudden this whole world is opening up to me suddenly. And with Nashville, it's like, who is this guy that has these songs in the top 5 that wrote them by themselves?
Right.
Because everybody co-writes in Nashville. And here's this guy that wrote them by himself. And so everybody, of course, you know, wants to know who you are.
So where does that lead you then? I mean, do you what's the next step for Jon?
I'm doing television shows, and I'm interviewed for magazine articles, and I'm in my pictures in Billboard magazine opposite Vince Gill's, you know, for the CMA awards or whatever the awards were. And I'm in the BMI magazine, does an article on me. And it's that. And I'm booked in a different way now. I'm booked because I have to meet all these people and do these interviews and things.
Right.
And so it's thrilling. And I'm also getting to meet the cream of the crop of the Nashville songwriting community. You know, I meet everybody.
But you're not playing though. Do you miss that part of it?
No, I was playing. Well, the only gig that you play 2 gigs in Nashville. One is Douglas Corner, which is kind of a funky bar, but everybody plays there. It's closed now, I think, but it was and the other, of course, is the famous Bluebird Cafe.
Sure.
And that's where you play in the round, like 4 songwriters sit in a circle in the middle of the room, and everybody surrounds you, and you trade songs with, you know, the best songwriters in Nashville.
Yeah.
And so instead of playing regular gigs, I was at the Bluebird maybe once a month playing with these hit songwriters. And every song that they're playing around the circle, everybody knows the words to. They're big hits. And so suddenly I'm in a whole upper echelon of songwriters and playing with all these great musicians and songwriters. So, and the money's coming in, so I don't need to gig anymore. But the Bluebird is where you play because it's a prestige gig and everybody wants to see you. Right. And so the room is filled with the publishers and the music people and all the fans and all of that. And so you get to play in front of them.
All right. And so then do you start going back to Austin? Did you travel around a little bit? Did you tell me before?
Yeah, I still I would go to Austin, play gigs in Texas and Colorado still, back
Oh,
and
okay.
forth with my contacts, and write songs with some of my friends in Austin, and still pitch my songs to the Texas music community. Texas is a world unto itself.
Hmm.
And there are acts that are famous in Texas that a lot of people haven't even heard of, that have big followings.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to get songs cut. And I started getting cuts by, say, Gary P. Nunn, who was well known for being part of the Lost Gonzo band with Jerry Jeff Walker, and Bill and Bonnie Hearn, who are really well known down there, did my songs. And of course, the Dixie Chicks were playing my songs all over the place. And I was getting known in the Texas area more for my songs, I think, than my performing. But, I established myself down there as well.
But didn't you also go on to teach songwriting at some places?
Well, that's interesting because I had taught songwriting a little bit in Denver, because since I had no one to teach me how to write a song in Erie or in Denver, there weren't teachers to do that. So I taught myself. And when I got to Nashville, the woman who ran the Nashville Songwriters Association International, her name is Pat Rogers. She saw me play at some of these showcases in Nashville and heard that I was a songwriting teacher. And she thought that she would start what's called the Song Camp at Nashville, where people from all over the country would come into Nashville for a weekend or two. And she would have a bunch of songwriters teach songwriting to these people.
Yeah.
So I had to write a curriculum with my friend Rick Beresford. We wrote an entire songwriting curriculum for when these people would come into town. And then they came into town, and this, all of a sudden, it became a very popular, established thing, the song camps.
Right.
And so I started traveling for NSAI all around the country and teaching seminars in LA and San Diego and Seattle. And I taught one in Denver even, and in New York City. And so I became known as a songwriting teacher, as well, and that got me, the phone started ringing, and all the songwriters that were trying to make it in Nashville, a lot of them were interested in learning how to improve their songwriting. So I started having people come over to the house and play me their songs, and I would critique them and help them rewrite them. I had written a whole group of critiquing
like a curriculum,
things like that for rewriting.
Gotcha.
And all of a sudden, people were coming over to my house all the time, and that. So all of a sudden, I was my own industry.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, in some of that research that I did back when you were still in the Erie in 73, I saw some things that said that you and a guy named Bill Neely were doing musician workshops in Perry Square. I mean, was that songwriting or was that just jamming?
No, it was the same kind of thing where, people would sit around, and everybody wants feedback on what they're doing, especially from somebody that may be like one step ahead of them in the music business. And I've done the same thing. I had mentors all the way through me coming up. I had mentors, John Novella was a mentor. And Barry Drake from the Coffee House Circuit was a mentor. And as I kept moving up, I had, more and more high level mentorships of people sitting me down and saying, don't do this. When this happens, do this, but don't ever do this, and don't say it this way, say it that way. And, that kind of, a sentence or two. I remember playing a song for Jerry Jeff Walker once. He wrote Mr. Bojangles and tons of great songs. And I was at the Menger Hotel in San Antonio in his suite And I played him a song of mine called Two of a Kind, hoping that I could, pitch it to him and he would do it. And I got done playing it and I looked at him. I said, "What do you think?" And he looked at me and he said, "Too many words." And that's all he said.
From the guy who wrote Mr. Bojangles.
Well, yeah. But he had kind of a lilting crooner voice, and there were too many lyrics in that song for him to consider cutting it. But he did me a service.
Yeah.
By letting me know that when you're pitching to an artist, the artist has a style.
Yeah. Right.
They have things they will sing about, things they won't sing about, but they have a vocal style and they want their vocal to shine. So write a song with a good melody and have enough space between the words so that they can do what they do with words. Mm-hmm. And, little things like that help me become a better songwriter.
Sure. So what is up with you these days? Are you still doing the same thing?
I'm still teaching. I'm not pitching songs anymore or anything like that. But I'm still teaching, and I have students really all over the world. I've got a guy in Australia that calls me. I've got a guy who goes to Beijing and calls me from China. Wow. I have people in Vancouver and San Diego and LA, and people still around Nashville that want to improve their songs or, help get some techniques on, how to rewrite. Sure. And I'm pretty good at teaching people how to rewrite their songs and improve them, even incrementally, because the song, if the song is going to get a cut in Nashville, it can't have a hair on it. Mm-hmm. There can't be any doubt. So I can help people clean up their songs before they spend all the money demoing the songs. They come on over at the house and we hang out and, that kind of thing.
Do you ever get back to Erie? Do you have any connections here anymore?
My brother has a farm a little bit south of Cambridge Springs.
Okay.
And so I've gone up there for a couple of weeks every once in a while in the summer to hang out at the farm and then drive into Erie and always take a drive around the peninsula, always.
Sure. Right.
My childhood and my teenage years were all the beach. And so I go there and hang out, and I still have a few friends there that I'll see, and we'll get together and have dinners or parties or anything like that. But it's always great to go back to Erie. I love Erie, Pennsylvania.
That's great. Any bandmates that you're still in touch with? I know John Novello's down nearby you now.
Yeah, I'm still in touch with John and Jack every once in a while. I think Jack's in Boston or somewhere up there, but we'll communicate every once in a while. And Jack Coleman.
Oh, Jack Coleman, right.
Yeah, okay. He's still, he's still playing gigs and things, I think, and it's always great, to hear him play. Yeah. But not a lot of the people. But I have great memories of a lot of the bands in Erie and a lot of my times there. I mean, that's where I learned how to do everything.
That's right.
That was the beginning. And Erie had a great rock and roll scene. Thank God I grew up in that town, because for the size of that town, the musicianship is incredible. Yeah. And it has a long history of extremely talented people. And without hearing those people in my formative years, I probably never would have had the idea that I could make something of myself.
Sure. Well, I can't think of a better statement to end this interview on. That was perfect, as though you wrote it yourself. For a podcast called Erie Music History, that's a perfect place to end. How's that sound?
All right, that's great. Fine with me.
Special thanks to Jon for taking the time to talk with me. He is a super busy guy, so I appreciate it. Also, remember to check out Jack Stevenson's 2-Man Happy Hour podcast. That's the number 2manhappyhour.com. That's where you can find out what bands and musicians are playing in Erie today and where. Jack does a great job of supporting the local scene. Oftentimes he's running around getting his picture taken with a lot of the bands, so check that out. Also, thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to support this podcast in any way, you can go to patreon.com. There is a red button on the homepage of the website, and you can support any way you can. So I appreciate all of that, and until the next season, which will be season 3, I appreciate you listening to the Erie Music History Podcast. I'm Chip Shell. Thanks.